Hi everyone, this is Chris.
And this is Julia, and welcome back to episode number 21 of A Bar Above's Mixology Talk podcast, where we talk about cocktails, mixology, bartending, and most things you can drink.
I can't believe our podcast can officially drink now. Number 21.
Our little podcast is all grown up.
Yeah, hopefully it'll get a job here pretty soon. And
maybe move out.
Bills. Right, exactly.
Maybe make some drinks. Yeah, that'd be nice.
That'd be nice, yeah. So a couple of weeks ago, we got a email from one of our listeners, and they wanted us to do a podcast on bitters. So we're going to talk about bitters today. We're going to talk about how to use them in cocktails, different types, and also a general overview of how to make it.
Yeah, I think it makes a lot of sense. We covered the base spirits way in the beginning of this podcast. We've talked about simple syrup. We've talked about citrus, I think.
Yeah. We've covered most of the common stuff in cocktails. So
can't put it off any longer.
No, I guess we're gonna have to get into this thing, huh?
So, what are cocktail bitters, Chris?
So cocktail bitters comes in two different forms. There's two different types of cocktail bitters. The first one is a potable bitters, and the second is a non-potable bitters.
And whenever I hear potable and non-potable, I always think of those like sketchy campgrounds where they have the water spouts that say non-potable, but it's like the only water around.
Right. So basically, potable bitters means that you can drink them as they are.
Non-potable means don't drink it.
I probably wouldn't recommend it. So like versions of potable bitters would be like Campari. Fernet, there's a product called Gran Classico, which I absolutely adore. And even vermouth could be considered a non-potable bitters.
Basically, these are common cocktail ingredients that also have a fairly significant bitterness to them.
Right. And then the other type, the non-potable type, is what is commonly called cocktail bitters. So this is like Angostura, this is Peychaud's bitters, and usually you only use them in really, really tiny amounts in cocktails because they just have such an intense flavor and such a intense bittering factor to them.
Am I crazy, or did I hear a story about some town in like Michigan? I'm making that up. I don't even know if it was in Michigan, where people would take shots of Angostura bitters.
Yeah, I think I came across an article about that too, and it's basically the number one consumer of Angostura in the world because they drink shots of Angostura.
That just sounds like a bad bet, doesn't it?
Man, I'm telling you, I don't even know if I would... No, I wouldn't be able to do it.
No, I don't think... I know I wouldn't. Well, if anybody out there listening knows where this is, I would love to find out so I can make sure that I get Chris over there and make him take a shot. So definitely leave us a comment in the show notes at mixologytalk.com/21. Let me know where that bar is, and I'll be sure to take a video.
Yeah, that'd be great. So bitters have actually been around for quite some time, and the word cocktail actually is a drink family which incorporates bitters into it.
Yeah, so originally, way back in the day, if you ordered a cocktail, you were actually ordering a very specific kind of drink that followed a kind of a template almost.
Right, exactly. So the template for a cocktail is base spirit plus some form of sugar and typically water in a form of simple syrup and bitters.
And yeah, I would say nowadays nobody really treats it that way, though. The word cocktail is sort of synonymous with an alcoholic
beverage
drink
of some sort.
Yeah,
right.
I mean, you wouldn't call beer a cocktail, but yeah, some sort of mixed drink is generally considered a cocktail. So I wouldn't worry too much about nomenclature at this point.
Yeah, and there's a lot of like history and folklore about it, and a lot of mystery, around the first cocktail. But essentially, bitters were used as a medicine back in the day, and it was a kind of a cure-all. And you hear that word,
right?
Snake oil.
Exactly.
This is kind of how it all started, was as a form of medicine.
Or supposed medicine.
Right, and then the cocktail evolved when people started adding their medicine, that was totally air quotes, by the way, medicine into alcohol to make it more enjoyable.
To make it taste better.
Right.
Huh. Interesting. Yeah, I mean, I don't know about you, but I kind of consider all alcohol medicinal.
Yeah, me too. Yeah. I think I'm very healthy.
For now, we'll see.
Yeah, so... Yeah, and once Prohibition happened, one of the things that happened was a couple of the companies were actually protected from Prohibition because they were classified as medicinal and not an alcohol.
Yeah. So we don't know exactly which companies those were, but we suspect it's some of the older ones like Angostura and Peychaud's.
Right, and it's funny because if you look through a lot of these pre-Prohibition cocktail books, you'll see quite a variety of different cocktail bitters, and we're starting to see a resurgence back into that now. And a lot of companies are actually going back into those old cocktail books and trying to recreate some of the bitters that are found in those books. It's really kind of exciting.
Yeah, well, I know there's definitely a movement towards making all these pre-prohibition cocktails, and I imagine if they call for a bitters, you gotta find the bitters.
Yeah, absolutely. So
we've covered what bitters are and kind of where they came from, but how are they used in cocktails and why do you use them?
So there's a couple different reasons to use bitters in the cocktails. First of all, it adds a ton of flavor to a cocktail, and you only need a really, really small amount. So that's usually the first way you utilize bitters in a cocktail. Many of the times you'll hear bartenders call it either bartender's salt or our spice cabinet because it has so much flavor that it adds to a cocktail.
Yeah, I like bitters because when I'm trying to pretend to be a mixologist, which I absolutely am not, and I devise a drink and I take a sip of it and it's like terrible and boring, I just go to town on the bitters.
Yeah, and like I said, it's a great way to add a lot of flavor in a really small amount of volume. And the same thing like when you're cooking. If you cook something and it seems a little bit flat and boring and one-dimensional, you add a pinch of salt or some spices to it, and it really spruces it up and makes it a lot more flavorful.
Exactly. So I highly recommend that methodology for all you other mixologists out there.
Right. So it's just a great way to add some flavor and kind of spruce it up. The other thing is that it can be used to offset sweetness. So like when you use them in a Manhattan, you have that sweet vermouth in there, and the bitters helps to kind of counteract some of the sweetness in that sweet vermouth while adding a depth of flavor to it as well.
Definitely. And like I mentioned earlier, it's a great way to just add flavor if you find yourself with a cocktail that just needs a little bit more love. This is something that I find happens to me sometimes with egg white cocktails because the egg whites really, they add an incredible mouthfeel and sort of smoothness, but they also mute the flavors a little bit. So sometimes, usually I'll try to pair an egg white with some bitters of some sort.
And that's a really good thing. Like, we'll have to do a podcast on egg whites. I can't believe we haven't done that yet.
Oh, that's definitely coming.
It's one of my favorite things. Well, I say that every episode, I think.
That's true. You have an egg white problem.
Add it to the list. So just a general idea of kind of how bitters are made is basically just a really intense infusion of herbs, spices, and always has a bittering component to it as well.
Yeah, basically, you could make a tincture exactly the same way, just leave out the bittering agent. Bitters are tinctures. They just also have a bittering agent in them. There's really no difference in how they're made.
Right, and so to kind of clarify that word tincture, basically it's just a really intense infusion. So, and typically they're like one or two different ingredients. So if you want to do a horseradish tincture, you throw a bunch of horseradish and some high proof alcohol, and it basically just strips away that characteristic and puts it in a really concentrated form. So that's a tincture. And then a bitters would be a tincture with multiple different ingredients and a bittering compound. So the bittering compound is what separates bitters from tinctures.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah. And as far as infusions go, we haven't talked a lot about this on this podcast. We talked about it, I think, briefly with simple syrups. But again, just think of tea. When you're making tea, you're infusing the water with your tea leaves. It's just like that. When you're making a tincture or a bitters, you're infusing the neutral grain spirit, often a high proof vodka, with whatever you're putting in it.
Absolutely. And we actually did a video on how to make bitters and tinctures way back like a year ago. And
yeah, it was a while ago.
We'll include that in the show notes for sure.
For those geeks out there.
Yeah, exactly. My people.
If I'm not mistaken, and I haven't asked Chris this before, but I'm fairly certain that the entire reason we started this website, podcast, business was just to give him an excuse to create a library of tinctures.
No.
I'm totally right.
You may be right, but I'm not going to confess that.
Not on the air, at least.
Yeah. So, but yeah, we'll have a link to that in our show notes.
Well, I think that just about wraps it up. We've covered how you make them, what you use them for, and generally what bitters are.
Yeah, so that's pretty much the bitter end. And speaking of the bitter end is also a bitters company that's located in New Mexico, and they have some really cool, kind of crazy flavors out there, like Jamaican jerk bitters and Memphis barbecue bitters, all kinds of fun stuff. So, if you're looking for some bitters to check out, that's a great place to start.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of really great bitters companies out there. We mentioned these because we met Bill at Tales of the Cocktail this year, and he was telling us about his company company. They make some really crazy flavors. I love how bitters give this flexibility, because I don't know about you, but if you were to tell me, well, I want you to make a cocktail and I want Memphis barbecue flavor in it, I don't even know where I would start. But thanks to bitters, you can do that fairly easily.
Right, absolutely, and it's true. And so hopefully we've given you a decent overview of what cocktail bitters are and kind of how they're made and what they're composed of, and hopefully how you can use them in cocktails as well.
And once again, if you do want to geek out, we've got a couple great videos about bitters, about how to make them, and we'll definitely link to those in the show notes, which you can find over at mixologytalk.com/21.
So next week, we're going to have an interview with one of my friends, Steven, from Deep Nine, Jennifer? That spirit.
Bueller?
Bueller. So definitely stay tuned for that.
And one of our first questions is going to be, how on earth do you pronounce Jennifer? Genever?
I don't know.
So definitely come back next week and figure out how wrong we were.
Exactly. So until then, have a great drink, and cheers, everyone.
Cheers. Never miss an episode by subscribing in iTunes or YouTube. And as always, check out the show notes by clicking on the right.